Hey there, I got a video today about beekeeping, and I personally do not know anything about bees other than I know they're very important for the world, for our food production, all that stuff. And we do have a hive here on the farm, and we have a guy named Nick who lives nearby, who comes by and he manages the hive for us, and I'm very grateful, and does a couple other things here, and just a cool dude. And he said today I could film him while he's installing a new hive. He's also going to go do an inspection of the current hive that we have here and give a bunch of cool information. And you know, he's not an expert, he is a hobbyist, and he's got a little bit of experience now. He's getting more comfortable with it, and you know, just want to share a bunch of information about it. And yeah, happy to share this with you guys. Here we go. Hey Nick, so I know you live in the neighborhood and you've been super helpful with maintaining the bee setup here, but also in terms of, you do a couple other things, like you like to take care of the grass for us and stuff. So I really appreciate everything you've done so far. And so today you're bringing a new colony in and you're setting up a new box. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, that's correct. So today we have 2 bee packages and we're going to install them into these 2 hives. So right now the packages are inside the boxes right here, and what is in the package is just it's about 10,000 bees and then a queen, and the queen is isolated in a little queen cage. And what we're going to do today is we're going to take out the queen cage, set it in one side of the box, and then we're going to put the rest of the box in there and just close it up and give the bees some time to get acclimated with one another, migrate out of that box, and then we'll come back in a few days and remove the box, and then hopefully by then the queen will be out of her cage and the hive will get started. We can let them start building out wax and get going.
All right, so 10,000 bees, is that like a standard bee package?
That's well, they don't, so you buy them in pounds. So these are 4-pound packages. Okay. And 4-pound packages and 1 queen, that's what each of these packages has. That's pretty standard. I think it's about 10,000, you know, I'm not positive.
Okay.
10, 15 maybe.
Okay, but it's by the pound, so.
It's by the pound, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. And so what kind of bees are we talking about?
Okay, so these are honeybees. Obviously, these are Apis mellifera, this scientific name, but it's, honeybees are European, so there's different honeybees from different countries, and they apparently have different personalities. So I always hear that these are Italian honeybees. That's what people always say. I don't know how I could know that, but if they're pretty docile and friendly, then we assume they're Italian. I heard that other countries have more aggressive bees, but all I can say for now is they're honeybees.
Okay.
They better be, that's what I paid for.
All right, cool. All right, so talk about the process here. So we have an established colony here.
Yes, yes.
And this has been doing great. Talk a little about what's going on here with these other boxes.
Well, you're talking about the process of the installation?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to show you, if I can get the box out. So this is the package, and what I like to do is, this is sugar water in here, and if you just spray them with some sugar water, you kind of keep them happy, because they're not exactly happy being trapped in here right now. One thing that's important is you definitely don't want to leave them out in the sun to bake, you know, or leave them in their car, that kind of stuff. I like to put them in the box because that's just, you know, ordinary environment for them. But what we have here is this little lid is covering up a circular hole in here, and then there's a can of sugar water that's kind of plugging that hole. And then this tab right here is connected to the queen cage, which has, we'll get back to the queen cage, but so what we're going to do is we'll take off this lid, this little piece of wood, and then slide out this can of sugar water, and there'll be an opening here. And then once the sugar water can is out, we can pull the queen cage out. And after that happens, there's a little cork that we have to unplug on the queen cage. And I'll show you when we do it, but there's 2 corks, and it's important to not pull out the wrong cork, because one cork opens the kind of a doorway to this hard can. It's like a sugar, you know, hard sugar in there, and that is something that the bees have to kind of eat through, and it takes them a few days to do that. And the whole idea is that so this queen that is in here is not, the bees did not come from this queen. These bees and this queen are not related, so you have to get them to kind of take to one another. So the queen cage that has that rock candy in there, the time it takes for the bees to eat through that is supposed to be how long it takes for the bees to get used to that queen's smell, and that's the delay. So if you pull out the wrong cork and you let the queen out right away, she'll probably get killed or something like that. It's not a good idea. So
it's basically a distraction long enough for them to get used to each other.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's all about the smell and the pheromones and stuff like that. So, and while they're in there, you'll see on the front of the hive, they have these little doors. So we'll just close the doors in there and they'll just be stuck and for a few days. And it's important to put sugar water in there during that time so they don't starve to death while they're in there.
All right, Nick, can you talk a little bit about the just the basic setup here in terms of gear?
Sure thing. So an ordinary beehive, so every beehive starts off with a bottom box. They call this the brood box because the queen lays her eggs and her brood in the bottom box. And if and this is sitting on top of a bottom board. So you have your brood box on top of your bottom board, and that's the way the hive starts. That's all you really have. It's just the bottom brood box, because you don't want the size of the boxes to be too big for the hive. They need to kind of it's hard for them to kind of patrol that much area. And then so you have the bottom brood box down here, and then the queen excluder right here. So the queen excluder looks like this, and it has these bars on it, and the queen is just too fat to get through, but the other bees aren't. So it's just like it sounds. It excludes the queen, so she's stuck down here, and up here is basically it's just pollen, honey, nectar, bee bread, that kind of stuff is all up here, and no eggs, no actual larva, any of that stuff. Because the queen's down below. Because the queen's down below. And this is important when you want to harvest honey, to make sure the queen doesn't end up in certain areas. Right now, I'll probably move this queen excluder up here eventually so this hive can grow, but
okay, so you start with the brooder box with everyone in there together, and then as you add more boxes, you put that.
Yeah, and these boxes, these names for the boxes, these boxes are all the same. It's just where they are. So if it's on the bottom, you call it a brood box. If it's up here, it's a honey super. And then they have like half stacks. So some supers are not as tall as this. They might be, you know, a half as tall. But yeah, all the boxes are kind of interchangeable. But so
depending on where you are with your colony, and you can expand and contract, or
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you do want to keep an eye on the size of your colony to add new boxes, because if the colony grows too big and it's kind of squeezed in there, uncomfortable, they'll swarm and find a new home, and you just lost your beehive. But if the box is if they're too small and you have too much space in there, then certain pests like hive beetles and stuff are harder to manage. The hive kind of needs to be able to manage that. They need to be able to patrol their area.
Okay, so I know that, I don't know when it was, maybe a month ago, you came and added another box here.
Yes, yeah.
All right.
And I don't know if they even needed another box. I was just concerned that they were going to swarm, because it's the time of year for that. And they were looking pretty active and pretty large.
It's been pretty warm here.
Yeah, I'm going to go into this hive later today and see how well they're doing. And the last piece of equipment is a feeder. So it's this part right here, and so what it looks like on the inside. And this is a easy to use feeder, because you can just pour the sugar water right here on the top, and the bees can access it without, you know, flying out and escaping the inside of the hive.
So that's cool. It's got a little area for the bees to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just access it from the top and add your sugar water.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to use a feeder without having a queen excluder underneath it at some point, because when you go to inspect your hive and you remove this part and you set it aside, you don't want the queen to be in there without you realizing it. You kind of want to have an idea of where the queen is going to be, so you can be precautious when you go through that part of the hive, because you don't want to squish her on accident and, you know, there goes your hive. And then, you know, you have the lid, that's it.
Okay, so when you're going in there to feed them, you just have to take the lid off.
Yeah, and when we go in there, to feed them, feeding them is pretty easy. Yeah, you just pour the sugar water in there. But today we're gonna actually inspect the hive and go inside and see what's going on.
Okay, in terms of sugar water, I'm asking simple questions here.
Yeah.
Is that like a 50-50? Or is there a certain ratio that you like to make?
So there's a lot of kinds of ratios. Normally, I'll show you what I have over here. This is about 1-to-1 sugar to volume. Okay. I mean sugar to water by volume, and it has this color you can see. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of yellow amber color in there, and that's, if it's not concentrated enough, you won't really get that kind of amber color. And I think that's kind of what I look for. I mean, it's not an exact science to it. This, for example, this right here, this is about 2 water for 1 sugar, because I don't want to clog up the spray bottle. But one of the things that people do though when they make sugar water is they'll, like, say like a mason jar, right? They'll fill it up halfway full of sugar, fill it up all the way with water. That's going to be too dilute, I think, because, well, that's too dilute for me, because that's not really 1-to-1. Like, you'd have to fill it up like 75% full of sugar, because of the way that it squeezes down all the space in between the, so there's not an exact science to the sugar water, but it does take some trial and error, because most people, their issue is they don't make it concentrated enough, I think. And it's because they don't like heat up the water when they make it, so they're tired of stirring it, and they're like, this is good enough, and they give up. And that's not good though, because you put that in the hive and the bees don't eat it, and it just.
Okay. Are you feeding them all year round, or is it certain times of year?
No. So, well, if it's a really weak hive, maybe you have to, but ideally you would. I mean, these hives, we have to feed them right now because they're brand new. They have no honey stores, and we're going to trap them in there for a few days. So the new hives, and I probably will feed them. I'll keep an eye on them, but for as long as it takes for them to kind of get going on their own. It shouldn't take that long though. I mean, around here the flowers are pretty good and stuff, but most of the time you feed them is through the winter, when you're concerned about them starving to death and they need to have honey stores to get through the winter. But one of the things, I mean, if you feed them the sugar water, that's going to end up as, you know, honey of some sort. But if you want to actually get honey out of your hive, you know, ideally you want to get nectar. You know, you don't want to have fake sugar water honey. So that's something people should think about too if they're trying to get honey out of their hive. You know, feeding it sugar water is not the best way to get that.
It's like junk food.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still honey, but it's just not like, it's the kind of honey you would give at the store, and like, you know, those big things that are the fake honey, I guess. You know, unacquainted, there's the hive tool, which I can show you when we actually go into the hive. And then there's a smoker, which I don't have here right now, but I'll light that in a minute. And then a ratchet strap. Not everybody ratchets up their hive. I do, because sometimes, well, here in the city, it's not a big deal, but like if you have animals that might knock it over, you know, then you come to your hive, and if I've had a hive get knocked over and be on its side and just pick it right back up and it's back to normal. Whereas if you don't have it strapped up, you have like a rock on top and it just breaks open, then that's a bigger problem. But yeah, the ratchet strap is just kind of holds it all together. There's really not that much to it other than kind of letting the bees do their own thing. You just kind of get out of their way a lot of the times.
Cool. I just like the modularity of it, and just, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing about beekeeping, is kind of figuring out what equipment should be used at what time, and getting it ready too. I mean, the equipment is kind of hard to. It's hard to get into a clean. You know, you don't want to put it like if your hive dies and then in the fall, and you want to put a new colony in there in the spring, like we're about to do today. Like, I had to spend a good amount of time going through these hives, cleaning them out and making sure the mold and these actually had hive moths, so I had to go and get different parasites and stuff out of them. But it's not too hard. Okay,
and in terms of maintenance for this, how often do you have to check on it or do anything?
That's kind of, you'll hear a lot of different things about that. It kind of depends on what you're seeing. So if you have a hive that just looks like they're doing great and you have no reason to think something wrong, you wouldn't really want to go in there other than, I don't know, maybe like once a month. I mean, you could get away with going in once a month, I think, if you had a really good looking hive. But if you don't check on them, if you don't keep an eye on them regularly, then it's kind of hard to tell what's going on the inside without going and doing a full inspection.
All right, so you're preparing to go and inspect the hive.
Yes.
So what are you doing right now?
This is the smoker. So smoker is helpful for kind of keeping the bees docile while you're inspecting the hive. And you don't need very much smoke, but what it does is it kind of interferes with their way to communicate with each other through smells and that kind of stuff. If they get alarmed, they'll release their alarm pheromone. That's what it's called. That brings other bees, so the smoke just it stops them from kind of communicating with each other, and it makes them actually drink the honey, which gets them a little slow and kind of drunk and happy. At least that's what I think happens, But yeah, the smoker is pretty helpful though. I normally actually don't use a bee suit. I almost never use a bee suit unless it's bad weather or some other reason why you're liable to get stung. But normally a smoker is good enough. But in the beginning, you definitely probably want to use a bee suit until you know.
All right, so you gonna get that thing started up?
Yeah, I'll get it started up. I normally use pine straw, but I'm just gonna use just this straw right here to get started, and probably some wood chips in there. The main thing is you want to get it started well enough to where it'll stay lit the entire time that you're in the hive, because you don't want to be in the hive and have it go out on you and not be there when you need it. But you also don't want to let it burn too hot, because the heat will really piss them off, and you don't want to make them angry. If you smoke them too much, they'll all start flying around and everything. So a little bit goes a long way. But see, wood chips actually works pretty well in my experience. Mostly I don't have that available when I'm doing this. But when you do start your smoker, especially if you have like pine straw, like I said, I normally do, you really want to kind of jam it in there pretty tight, so it'll burn slow and the whole time. And then actually one thing that I learned from another beekeeper, which I think it actually works, is if you take some grass like this, some long grass, and just get the long blades of grass and something like that, and you ball that up on the top, it can actually kind of cool the smoke down a little bit. I'm not sure if that actually works, but I tend to do it because I think it works. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. It's pretty easy to light the smoker on a dry day, and when it's wet it can be tough, but like I said, the point is you don't want it to go out while you're in the hive.
Absolutely.
Do you want to do the inspection now?
Yeah, sure.
Also, the spray bottle is kind of like a smoker in itself. That'll really calm them down. But this is something that I only have for the installation today. I wouldn't have this ordinarily. The way I normally inspect a hive is I'll take the lid off, set it down upside down like this, and then you'll take the hive tool and you kind of want to break the seal. So there's this propolis and there's this bee gunk that kind of seals the whole hive together, and you have to kind of break these seals every time you take something out of the hive or take off a box or a frame or something. And you want to do that carefully, because if it just snaps open, it shakes everything, it's going to agitate the bees. But so you break the seal, you'll just remove this, and then I'll set this down like inside of this, and that's just because there's bees inside of the feeder that I don't want to come out, and you really don't want them landing on the inside and getting caught in the sugar water. Yeah, so just looking at this top box right here, there's really nothing going on it. So I'm not even going to go through this one. Well, I guess I can show you the parts of the hive. So we have inside the hive, there's frames. And these frames, so I just put this box in recently, so these frames actually don't have any comb drawn out on them yet. But you can see how it would happen. These frames actually have little hexagons in there where they would do it. But I'm not going to go through these frames because they're all empty. This is a box I just recently put in. Actually, I'm gonna put this on top. So it's getting a little bit windy, which isn't ideal. The bees aren't wild about that, but it is pretty sunny too, so it's not the worst weather. But yeah, I'll just smoke them a little bit. And I feel like that initial smoke just kind of makes them go and drink some honey in case there's like, you know, I think they imagine like a forest fire is coming and they might have to evacuate. I don't know what their thinking is. They probably don't have thinking, but I do like an initial smoking, and then like I said, you gotta kind of break this seal. You can see how it can kind of pop off if you're not careful. And then what I do first is you look on the inside of the queen excluder, and it's always good to have your sun to your back so you can kind of see what you're, you can look into the cells when you do that. But right now I'm just checking to make sure the queen is not on the inside, because I'm gonna set this aside. And whatever you do, you want to hold a frame, you know, the bees over top of the hive in case the queen falls out, she falls back into the hive. But I don't know where the queen is in here. So when you first go in and you don't know where the queen is, you kind of have to be a little more careful just not to accidentally squish her. And actually what we have in here right now, these are hive beetles. Hive beetle traps. And I'm gonna take these out, or at least this one. And I'll bring this up to the camera so you can see it. But I don't know if you can see these little hive beetles in there floating around. That focus for you?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, and in the south, there's tons of hive beetles, so. But yeah, the reason I take it out is because this has got oil. I think it's mineral oil in this one. But you don't want to spill that into the hive if you can help it. That trap. So the hive beetle goes into this little area, and I think just the slipperiness of it gets them stuck. I'm not entirely sure. Okay. And then so you say, if you forget about the smoker, it'll go out on you. Okay. And this hive tool, you can just use this to kind of break these frames because everything's stuck together in here. And one of the things when you do a hive inspection, you kind of, before you get in there, you want to know why you're going in there, because it's like a home invasion for the bees. So you want to be kind of quick and speedy. But what I'm mainly looking for right here is just pests and different things that might be concerning. And then I'm also looking for eggs, or really the queen, but sometimes the queen's hard to find, so eggs are a good indication that she's just recently been there.
So how are things looking in there right now?
This is looking pretty good. There's not any brood on this frame. This is just nectar. But
can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so the brood is, so the queen will lay an egg inside a cell, and it's one egg per cell. And then the egg will grow into a larva, and then once the larva gets big enough, they'll cap it over. And it'd probably be easier actually for me to pull out a frame and show you exactly what I'm talking about. But so since the queen is not on this one, I'm gonna set this aside just so I can get into these other ones pretty easily. I'm gonna try to find So what we have right here, so this top part is all honey. This is all capped honey. I guess now it's top. Same on this side. And then there's a couple cells in there, but not enough to really show you what the brood looks like. And the first thing you want to do is just see if you can find the queen, because if you have the queen out of the hive, you just want to be mindful of that. And you can tell by the way that they buzz how upset they are. Oh wow, so this has actually got a queen cell in there. So this is, so these are queen cells right here, queen cups, or swarm cells, supersedure cells. I get them all mixed up, but this is how a queen is born. So right here, this is where a queen, I'm gonna hold it over the hive. This is where a queen is developing right now.
I think it looks like a peanut almost?
Yeah, that's definitely. Okay. And then these kind of larger, so this is all brood. These kind of, they look like they're capped over the same way the honey is, but they're kind of individualized in the way that the capped honey isn't. But
so each of those, one of those will turn into a bee?
Each one of these is, yeah, has a bee inside of it right now. So it was a larva. They capped it over. It's kind of like a caterpillar in its cocoon. It's like it's in its cocoon right now. When it comes out, it'll be a full-grown bee. These larger ones sticking out, these are drone cells. So the drone is like the male bees. Like 90% of the bees are worker bees, the female bees. They don't have, the drones don't do a lot of work. They just mate with other queens. They don't do any work. I wish there were eggs that I could show you in here, but this might not even have a queen since it has these queen cells.
So that is a new queen being formed?
That's a new queen being formed in there. Sometimes a queen will, so like I'm gonna be really careful putting this back in here, because if there is no queen and maybe it's already swarmed, you know, I want to make sure I don't damage that queen cell so that this hive will have a queen in the future. But it's easy to forget about this and let it go out on you.
Well, you have your hands full at the time, right?
Well, see, they're pretty calm right now, so this is like the happy, romantic beekeeping experience, not the scary beekeeping experience. Right here, you have a bee is being born. That's his little face. He's trying to crawl out. Same over here. I don't know if that's in focus, but yeah, there's a couple of them. But there's no eggs in here, so there's probably not a queen in this one. I bet this hive already swarmed, so I don't see any eggs. This is a pretty frame, but yeah, that's all capped honey around the border, and you actually have some pollen in there and some nectar. And the pollen's pretty cool because it's all these different colors and stuff. But it's not what we want to see. Right now we want to see our queen. So for this hive, if the, what I'll probably do, wow, this is heavy. You can just see all that honey. You can imagine that this one's pretty heavy. Whoops. Yeah, so for this one, I'm just going to wait and see if these queen cells actually, if the queens actually come out and mate and start laying eggs in a few weeks, then I'll just leave them be. If the queen cells that are in there, if for some reason they don't make new queens, then I'll probably have to go get a replacement queen. But you can buy those, you know.
But the fact that you see that queen cell
the fact you see that queen cell is, I mean, it's not like a problem necessarily, because that's kind of what they're supposed to do in the spring, but it does mean that you
gotta keep an eye on it now.
Well, yeah, I mean, this one, the hive is already swarmed, so the queen probably already took away half the bees. This is the half that's remaining, and they're just waiting for their new queen to hatch and, you know, start a new hive. And
all right, so the takeaways here is you didn't find a queen, but you found
queen cells.
Queen cells, but otherwise the health of the hive looks pretty good.
It does look pretty good, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't see, I didn't see any hive beetles. But yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good. One thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to put this second stack back on, because this hive swarmed and there's just, it's smaller now. I'm going to bring it back down to a single stack, and I'll probably come back in like a month and add that one, hopefully. Like I said, I'll have to come back later and make sure that this hive stays alive, that this queen hatches and starts laying eggs and stuff the way that she's supposed to. Yeah, you just putting it back together, you know, you want to, you try to, I mean, I tried to put the frames back in the same place where you got them, because I imagine it's like a little city in there, and like you would want to pick up like the east side of the city and put it in the west side. I don't know, but I don't know if that matters to the bees. But one thing that it does matter that's really annoying is that if you don't keep the frames straightened up, then they will see they'll make the wax, the comb, in a strange way where they'll bridge it to, you know, between two frames. They'll stick them together, or they'll bridge it against the side of the box, and then you can't pull out that frame and see what's going on in it, and that's kind of a pain, because, you know. All right, and that's pretty much it. Just in time for the bees to get agitated. But you just put this back on there, and you can hear, by the way, they're buzzing. They're just getting a little more defensive. You set this on there, and with the sugar water, I always make sure it's uphill, the side with the sugar water, so that it pulls up against the side where the bees can get to it. And that's it. I'll set this one up here so these bees can know to go back inside. And then that's just to get the bees off of the inside. All right, so here we're gonna do a package installation, a colony installation. And so what we have is this hive, which has been cleaned up and ready to go. And then this is the actual package. So I'm just they're getting kind of loud. So I'm gonna spray them with some sugar water. That'll make them happy for a little while. But first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to take these frames out, actually the ones that are already in here, and just one by one, just spray them. And this is just to attract the bees out. So when this is over, we're gonna take the queen, we're gonna set her over here on this side, and we're gonna set this box full of bees back on this side. And we want the bees to come out of that box and get, start building a home on these frames. And sorry, this bee is distracting me. But to do that, if you spray sugar water on there, they will definitely come out and do that, explore around. And this is actually a lot easier than people might think, but all I'm doing, that came off easier than I expected. Let's get these staples off. That's holding everything in. And then this is a part that's easy to screw up, because if you drop the queen cage in there, it can be a pain to pull it out. You have to stick your hand in there with all the bees. It's not fun. But Right now I'm trying to get this can out, which is, it's not really cooperating. There it goes. Okay, you're gonna hold on to this tab right here. You don't wanna, oh, there they go. I'm just gonna set them in there. Then you pull the, all right, so this is the queen cage, and you can't really see her well, but I'm gonna knock all these bees off. I'll come show you what I'm doing with it. All right, so this is the queen cage, and inside you'll see this this one real fat long bee, and that's the queen. She's got a blue marking on her, and the marking, they'll do that just to make it easier to find the queen when you're in the hive, because it can be hard to find her. But there's two corks. On this side you have a cork, on this side there's a cork, and you'll see this rock candy right here, this sugar. You'll take this cork out, and all the rest of the bees in the hive are going to go in there and eat that cork out, eat that sugar out, and that's the delay release of the queen that we were talking about. But all there really is to it is, you know, she's good to go now. I'll just, sorry, these bees are getting on me. I'll just stick it right here in the hive, just in between two frames, with the tab sticking out, and then I'll just close them up, and that's basically it. And you make sure the front door is closed right here, and all these bees are on the outside. They're just going to be stuck on the outside, but we'll come back in a few days and you'll just make sure that that queen has escaped her queen cage, and if not, you'll take out the other cork so she does, and that's really all there is to it. You'll just take the box out, add the rest of the frames, and you know, you're on your way. But all right, I'll go ahead and do this one real quick just so you can see me do it again, and then after that I'll put the feeders. I probably should have put the feeder on that one, but I'll put the feeders on there, feed them the sugar water, lock them up, and we'll come back in a few days. But
So one question that I had that came up while you were doing your presentation and getting the bees sorted was, you mentioned swarming a lot. I know we've heard that term before. Can you talk a little bit about what that means? Sure,
yes. Swarming, so to understand swarming, you kind of have to understand bees as an organism, and a lot of people call them a superorganism. So you have an individual bee, you know, that you can see on a flower buzzing around, and then you have the entire colony. And we talked about how the brood works, how the queen lays an egg, you know, the egg turns to a larva and then, you know, comes out as a full-grown bee. That's how an individual bee reproduces. Swarming is how the whole colony reproduces. And what happens is the queen will, the hive will actually kind of scout out, find a good area, you know, a good, you know, hole in a tree, or, you know, your attic or wherever they think is a great place to live. And half the hive with the queen will leave, and the queen will leave, take half the hive with her, and they will start a new colony, and they will leave the other half back at the hive, or back at your hive probably, and she will have laid those you know, basically new queens. It's a regular egg, but they feed it this royal jelly, and a new queen is born in the hive. So swarming is just when the colony, half of it leaves, starts a new colony, the other half remains, and you know, now you end up with two hives, and that's kind of how the colonies reproduce. And it's like a, you know, the meta layer of the reproduction of bees. But it's something you have to worry about as a beekeeper, though, because you don't want your hive to swarm without you know, to leave, and now you've lost that hive. What you want to do is you want to split up the hives, or you want to grow the hives, or keep them happy enough to where they don't swarm in a way where you've lost that hive.
So is it one of those methods, like by adding more boxes to give them more space?
You can do that, or you can split the hive itself. You can kind of swarm for them, But yeah, like if the hive gets too small, they will swarm. And sometimes you can tell when they're getting overcrowded because they'll be bearding out the front. You know, when you see so many bees kind of together just hanging out the front, they might just be overpopulated. But this hive, for example, which I'm pretty certain swarmed not too long ago based on the look of it, it wasn't overcrowded. You know, that wasn't the problem with that hive. It's just natural behavior, you know, for the bees to do that. So it's not like something's necessarily wrong, but you did lose, you know, your bees.
All right, so some natural just variability and like nature that's happening here.
Exactly. And when they do they do swarm, it can be kind of scary because it's like a whirlwind of bees. But it's scary if you don't know what they're doing. If you do know what they're doing, you'll understand that you're actually not very likely to get stung in that swarm of bees. They're not defensive towards you, and they're just kind of doing, you know, just leaving in a big cloud. But yeah, swarming is an interesting part of beekeeping that, you know, it's one of those things you'll have to Google about when you encounter that problem.
Well, Nick, thanks for showing all that cool stuff for us today. And so how long have you been doing this?
So I first started beekeeping in 2015, and when I first started, it was actually a job for me. So I kind of had formal training, and I was lucky to kind of learn a lot pretty fast. But since, you know, I've moved on from that job, I've been keeping bees for the past 5 years on my own personally, and I think I was surprised by how much I've learned through just the kind of trial and error and the experience of keeping bees through the years, trying to overwinter them, and the long-term kind of practice of beekeeping. So I've been doing it for 5 years, not as long as a lot of beekeepers, but I guess long enough to know how hard it is.
But it's one of those things that takes time, takes experience, because there's failures, there's things you learn from.
Yes, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of failures. I mean, all the hives I started off with are no longer with us. I mean, they might be out there in the woods because they swarmed away, still alive, but there's a lot of different parasites you have to worry about. There's feeding you have to worry about during the winter time. There's just a lot of things that you encounter along the way. And, you know, as far as the challenge of beekeeping, I think is to understand the uncertainty of it all, you know, to know that not every hive is going to do exactly what you want it to do. You might lose a hive here or that, but it's definitely worth it though. I mean, I'm at the point now where I've had enough success to feel like it's not a, you know, it's a worthwhile hobby.
So it sounded like you got some good experience with your job that you had 5 years ago, and it sort of built on that. But a lot of people may be thinking, like, I want to get into beekeeping. What's some good resources? Like, do you recommend doing some in-person stuff, like workshops, mentorships? I know there's some like organizations you can meet up with people, like online learning, books. Like, what have you found helpful, or what do you think is good for people?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. I mean, I was fortunate enough to not need to take a class, but I would recommend doing an in-person mentoring, some kind of shadowing situation, whether you join a beekeeping association near where you live, or you hire a apiary to show you how to do it. But in the beginning, you do want to have somebody kind of show you the ropes, make sure you're comfortable with the bees, make sure you're not allergic and that stuff. As far as resources, I think the way that I've experienced it is I will have a specific question come up, and then I will kind of search online for that specific, you know, how do you combine a hive? How do you, you know, how often should you feed your bees in the winter? I mean, different things like that. And I think just you have to kind of look all over the web for that kind of stuff. There's a ton of content on YouTube. There's a lot of good blogs and stuff about it. But I will say that there's not a right answer to a lot of the questions you may have. There's a lot of clearly wrong answers, but you just kind of have to do your research. I mean, that's kind of the trial and error aspect of it, I think, is to encounter a problem and then, you know, just Google it and see if you can find a solution.
Cool, so maybe some in-person stuff for some intro things, and then maybe YouTube University for the more specific questions.
Exactly, yeah. I think at the point I'm at now, I fortunately don't need somebody showing me how to do it, but in the beginning, I would recommend that, because it's easy to kind of lose your nerve. That's a big part of it, is to keep your cool and to not be nervous around the bees, not swat at them, that kind of stuff. And I think the in-person help is good for kind of acclimating you to just being comfortable with the hive, as much as it is about teaching you actually what to do in the hive. But yeah.
Very cool, man. Well, I appreciate everything you do and taking the time to show us the stuff today, and we're happy to have the bees here, obviously, and doing their thing and help us pollinate our crops here at the farm and keep everything going. So,
all right.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that was super cool, and I was pumped to share it with you guys. I don't know much about bees at all, so for me that was totally fascinating. I had way more questions for Nick, and I'm sure I'll be asking more questions as I see him here, as he stops by. And he does live in the neighborhood, so he just comes over and checks on the bees, and just an awesome dude. And he did say if you want to reach out to Nick at all, if you're local and want some help with bees or whatever, I don't want to give out too much of his time, but he left me his Instagram, so if you want to reach out, I'll leave a link down below if you want to check that out. But anyways, yeah, just awesome. It's really cool to have all this cool stuff going on the farm, and just want to share with you guys, and hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow.